Today I'd like to discuss childhood experiences and their effect. Many topics such as murder, rape, and abuse will be discussed during this video. I advise viewer discretion for those that may be unsettled or triggered by these topics. Now, I believe we all know a little something about childhood trauma and navigating our adulthood, but I wanted to take the time to better understand this connection. Starting off with a person many of us may know, Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. The purpose of this TED Talk is not to explain his series of criminal events, but he is a good example of a made killer. Richard Ramirez lived with an alcoholic, abusive father, and to escape this, he bonded with his older cousin Miguel. Miguel was a Vietnam War veteran who liked to tell war stories with all of the gory details to Richard. He showed photos, videos, and even taught Richard how to kill. One of the photos he showed Richard was of him holding a woman's severed head in Vietnam. What should be noted as well is that Miguel fatally shot his wife while Richard was in the room. After experiencing these horrible situations, Richard moved in with his sister and her husband. Unfortunately for Richard, his sister's husband was a chronic peeping Tom who took Richard out on his escapades. These details cannot justify, but do explain Richard's urges and actions later in his life. Richard killed 15 people as we know today, including other criminal behavior. Richard developed schizoid behaviors and violent tendencies due to his childhood. Many high-profile serial killers and criminals experience physical or sexual abuse during their childhood. While I cannot speak about the accuracy of this show, Criminal Minds displays the idea that criminals usually stem from negative childhood experiences and influence as well. We can see the lives of a serial killer unfold and what developed their later actions. This situation unfolds often for serial killers and other types of aggressive criminals. 540 male prisoners were examined, and this study showed a significant correlation between the Childhood Trauma Questionnaire and the Brown-Goodwin Lifetime History of Aggression interview. As the results from the trauma questionnaire increased, the interview showed higher levels of aggression in inmates. Essentially, prisoners who experience childhood trauma experience higher levels of lifetime aggression. Let me bring us back to Ramirez. We know that some experiences produce the killer, and some produce the killer's significant other. Richard Ramirez was married to Doreen Loy from 1996 to 2009. They were married in the San Quentin prison. Many of us couldn't possibly see ourselves falling in love with someone like the Night Stalker, but this behavior is a direct result of negligence, lack of healthy relationships, and obsessive tendencies. Treating your children with love and care is the number one rule of parenting, but healthy love is just as important. The observation that our early experiences can reflect the decisions that we make as adults can be seen in mental disorders. The development of lifetime depressive disorders is stable at around 23% naturally. This number increases by 2.7% for women and 2.5% for men who experience adverse childhood experiences. This tells us that adverse childhood experiences are strongly associated with depressive disorders and its development in adulthood. Childhood abuse and early intervention play a very important role in our lives. Children are susceptible to many factors. Not only can negative experiences influence who we are, but positive influences can as well. Women who took the 2015 Wisconsin Behavioral Risk Factor Survey reported that depressive and poor mental health issues were 72% lower in those that experienced positive childhoods and proper emotional parental support in their lives. We also see a trend in victims who experience childhood trauma and an elevated level of empathy. We see here that those with childhood trauma scored with higher levels of cognitive and affective empathy compared to participants without childhood trauma. This tells us that while ACE and trauma can lead to negative experiences, it can lead to positive growth and compassion later in life. Parents and guardians are the people given the role to shape the children of this world. Their decisions and actions directly affect us in our own actions. Parental divorce is not any one person's fault, but it does connect to problem behavior in the children who experience it. Those who experience a divorce when they were younger than 12 years old tend to exhibit higher levels of problem behavior in adulthood compared to those who grew up in an intact family. Young children specifically are heavily impacted by divorce and tend to blame themselves for the family's breakup. This discussion so far has revealed how criminal action can occur from trauma in our childhood, its connection to the development of mental disorders, and its connection to problem behavior in adulthood. All of these impacts are psychological and emotional. What many people do not know is childhood trauma's influence on our physical health. Children who experience physical abuse are more likely to develop lung disease and arthritic disorders. Childhood neglect shows an increased risk for diabetes and autoimmune diseases. Now, these developments are not complete on their own. Abuse and neglect usually leads to depressive and anxiety disorders, which then leads to the potential abuse of alcohol and drug substances. This can explain the risk of lung disease or diabetes. Many parents and guardians understand these risks. They understand the concept of my TED Talk today. What they do not understand is their potential actions. I don't abuse my children. I could never, some may think. The levels of abuse are complicated and most importantly extensive. Abuse cannot be defined just by hitting your child. Discouraging certain behaviors, punishing rather than teaching, and not believing your child are behaviors that can affect your child in the long run. Perhaps you discouraged your child from crying when they're upset. Now they have a hard time expressing their emotions and tend to keep their feelings repressed. 61.5% of adults and 48% of children report being exposed to adverse childhood experiences in their childhood. It is unfortunately common for individuals to suffer in their childhood. This trend can be reduced if we all take the measures to develop ourselves. Adults who experience ACE are raising children who then experience ACE, but we can use our experiences and exposure to this behavior to strongly discourage it for future generations. Awareness and acknowledgement is the first step to raising children with positive childhood experiences. I recently did a study asking 20 young adults between the ages of 18 to 30 to consider certain scenarios and discern certain behaviors. These scenarios included topics of traumatic experiences and crimes. With this information, we can gauge how young people think and better understand their beliefs. Let's go over a few of the questions provided on the study and its results. Firstly, I provided a scenario to participants. A young boy is being raised solely by a parent who is absent and very busy. 55% of participants rated the scenario a 3 out of 5 in terms of trauma. I personally expected this average to be on the lower scale, but a few participants did rate the scenario a 4 or a 5. I then asked participants to choose which option was the worst crime, home robbery or company embezzlement. Can you guess which was chosen? 80% of participants chose home robbery. Next, a scenario was given to participants and they were asked to rate it out of 5. A young girl witnesses a murder and keeps it a secret for life. 13 out of 20 participants rated this a 5. I then asked participants to rate a scenario out of 5 again. An elderly woman murders her husband through suffocation. 14 out of 20 participants rated this a 5. Next, 80% of participants chose physical abuse over verbal abuse, and 75% of participants chose a date rape scenario as a worse experience to an overdose scenario. One question that I was very curious about was pertaining to murder victims. This question asked participants to choose whether a young victim was worse than an old victim. All 20 participants said that a young female victim was worse than an old female victim. And among the male option, one participant out of 20 believes that an old male victim is worse than a female victim. Lastly, I stated in an agree or disagree question that murder was the worst crime, and perhaps surprisingly, 70% of participants disagreed with this statement. I personally am intrigued with the response of this survey and can conclude that most young adults consider traumatic scenarios in a similar way. Personal crimes and experiences are seen as worse, like the drug rape scenario, home robbery, or experiencing death, compared to the overdose scenario, company embezzlement, and witnessing death. In closing, we have discussed the numerous negative and positive effects of our childhood and can evaluate that our childhood experiences shape every aspect of ourselves. I'd like every viewer to take away one thing from this video. That is to stay aware. Stay aware of how you treat your children and everyone around you, and stay aware of how others are treating you and your own experiences. Let's prevent another generation of abuse together. Thank you.